Middle of the Pack podcast. Welcome to the Middle of the Pack podcast, episode 35, where we break from our kind of usual show, and this week we have just me. We are talking about fueling. We will be referencing Rennie McGregor's book, More Fuel You. We'll be talking a little bit about Sian Sek. She's got a podcast as well, which is very informative on the topic of fueling. And she's done a couple of episodes based on how to fuel for a marathon, how to fuel for certain races, and maybe how to just generally fuel. So I'm referencing a little bit of that throughout the conversation as well. But mostly I'll refer to episodes 29, 30 and 31 of the Middle of the Pack podcast, because we had Alter Nutrition on, we had Conor O'Keefe, we had Tara Wilson, Real Food Running, and we had Precision Fuel and Hydration on also. And we're kind of going to bring all those three together and talk about fueling, hydration, and then a topic I always bring up, and Sian Sek brought it up as well, caffeine gels and how that can help you in your races as well. So sit back, relax if you can. It's particularly good for anyone that is looking to run a marathon soon. And I did a post during the week where I was highlighting the fact that the Cork City Marathon is now 2 months out. So now is a good time to start really practicing your fueling, particularly on your long runs or any run that is over 60 minutes really. Start taking your gels, taking your liquid form of carbohydrate intake if that's what you're looking for. Or if you're looking at Tara Wilson on episode 30, she was a real food runner, so she had different ways of fueling herself other than the gel or other than the carbohydrate drink. So yeah, that's what we'll be looking at, and it's really to benefit any of those, whether you are an elite athlete or a middle of the pack runner or a back of the pack runner. Really, if you're serious about running and nutrition, this episode is for you. And Rennie McGregor says on the back of her book, More Fuel You, what we eat has a huge impact on our physical and mental health, on our performance in our chosen sport, whether we're elite level athletes or just enthusiastic amateurs. But with so much information out there, how do we choose a way of eating that is right for us? How do we choose a way of fueling that is right for us? And how do we get the right fueling strategy that will help us on race day? And that's what this episode is all about. So let's crack on. Let's crack in to episode 35 of the Middle of the Pack podcast. And we're talking about fueling. So where do we start really? And it's hard because, as I said, we will concentrate on hydration. We will talk about electrolytes and we'll talk about caffeine gel. And there are three things that confuse the hell out of me, basically. And I have listened to lots of different podcasts and I have read lots of different books and I have talked to a lot of experienced runners. And I will again reiterate that the most important thing really is that you think about yourself, because no matter what is effective for me, that is, it works for me, it's great, but it may not work for you. So that's why it's uber important that you are practicing your training and you're getting, one, the right type of gel for you, two, whether it's a gel at all, it might be just a drinks mix like Speed Dust from Alter Nutrition that we talked about. But you have to look into that for yourselves. You have to find the one that suits you. And you then train your stomach. Once you like the taste, once you like the consistency, once you like what it's doing for you, then you need to train your stomach. And you train as you're training for the marathon as well. And there's all these questions then when it comes to hydration, is how much drink should I take on during a marathon? Do I need electrolytes? The big question is, like, should you be taking them every day? And then there is also the question that always comes up is super shoes. Should I take super shoes or should I run with super shoes? And for me, the kind of equivalent benefit that you get from super shoes, you also get from a caffeine gel. So you have to think about whether you want to take a caffeine gel. Are they going to make you faster, or are they just going to get you into a panic and make you head for the nearest Portaloo? And that's really, to be fair, where people get confused about uh, the whole fueling, hydration, and marathon fueling, I suppose. And there's a huge amount of information out there, especially online. And a lot of it makes sense. A lot of it can confuse. So really the goal of this episode is to give you clear, practical advice. And it is for normal runners, especially if you're training for your first big race here in Ireland. Whether that's the Dublin Marathon or your first half marathon in Cork or your first full marathon. I know Limerick is coming up as well. Or even if you're just trying to survive a long run in sideways rain, and that could be in the summer or it can be in the winter. But the reality for me is I'm going to be basing it really on people that are going to be looking at 3 hours plus. I know a lot of podcasts, particularly running podcasts out there, are often hosted or presented by people that run sub 3. So a lot of the advice then can be tailored to those people. And it is difficult then. I remember when I was training for the Cork City Marathon, people were saying, you take a caffeine gel halfway through, and, halfway through for some elite athletes could be just an hour and a half. And therefore they only have another hour and a half to run. So that's why they might take it halfway through. For me, it meant probably me taking the caffeine gel about an hour and a half before I finished, or 45 minutes before I finished, as we'll discover later on. Or if you listen to episode 31 with Precision Fuel and Hydration, George was on, he was saying it takes about 45 minutes for a caffeine gel to kick in. So therefore, there's no point in taking it with 30 minutes to go, because you'll end up just collecting your medal, and that's when you'll be hyped up on caffeine. But we'll start really with hydration. And again, it's one of these confusing matters when we run, because when we run, we sweat. And yes, even in Ireland, when it's raining, you're still sweating. You're not magically hydrating through the drizzle touching your skin. And dehydration can make running feel really hard. It can push your heart rate up, and it can make you feel absolutely miserable by the end of your run. And as I said in episode 31, George was saying, if you're dehydrated, you then start making bad decisions, and you might decide that you want to skip that last gel. You might decide that, I'll drop my pace or I'll increase my pace. And all that can come from making bad decisions through dehydration. And there's no magic number as to how much water you need to take on. There's no perfect formula, no one-size-fits-all rule. Some days you'll sweat loads, some days you won't. And that's one of the things about the Cork City Marathon, is that you can get a real scorcher of a day, and you may be training in weather like we have now. So therefore, you have to rethink your racing strategy if it does turn out to be a really scorcher, because if it's classic Irish weather and it's raining and there's a bit of a breeze, that might be greater if it's overcast. But sometimes we might get 4 seasons in one long run, in one long race. And that's where it becomes difficult. And that's where it can become confusing. But most races will have water stations, so you don't need to bring water. Again, going back to episode 29 with Alter Nutrition, that's a liquid form of carbohydrates. So therefore, bringing that on board with you. And again, as a sub 4 hour, actually, I was just over 4 hours. If you listen to the show on a regular basis, I got 4 hours and 1 minute, but I'm hoping in Dublin to get under 4 hours. I brought 250 mils with me of Alter Nutrition, and I had the equivalent of 2 gels in each of them. Or probably in Dublin, actually, I had 1 gel, the equivalent of 1 gel, but now I've been training myself to run with 2 gels equivalent in 250. So that helped me in a way to hydrate, because I was running with that. But I also, I kind of mixed it up. I didn't go 100% with Alter Nutrition. I had some precision gels as well. So there is also then water stations, and they're normally every 5 kilometers. And that means that, you know, you can gauge how much water to take on at those water stations. But if you're just going out for a general run for under an hour, you don't need to bring water unless it's unusually warm if you're in a foreign country. But if you're running them between 60 and 90 minutes, you do need to bring a small bottle. You need to have some water, and you need to be taking a few sips along the way. When we're then getting into marathon training or long runs, this is where hydration matters. You should be taking on probably 400 to 800 mils per hour, and that's a small bottle or a few cups at each water station. Like I said, the water stations will be every 5 kilometers. You don't need to gulp it down. You don't need to chug it. You don't need to take liters on board. You just need to take what you need. You need to think about your thirst, and you need to think about what you need for that particular moment. Over drinking can cause just as much problems as dehydrations, because if you drink too much water during a marathon, it can actually be more dangerous than drinking too little, because at a lot of races, runners get into trouble. And we had an episode, I forget now, where we had the emergency nurse on, and she was wonderful. Laura Fleming, if you remember that episode, and she gave loads of advice again about why people might end up in the emergency tent. And I'm not saying that over drinking can cause that, but it can cause people to panic by drinking too much at a water station, especially when nerves are kicking in. So don't feel like you need to grab water at every table like it's the last pint before closing time. You just need to take small sips regularly. And like I said earlier, listen to your body. And on your training runs, let's be honest, we don't have water station on our long runs. So you need to kind of think about how you train yourself with water, whether you want to carry a flexi flask, or some people, if they're on somewhere like, in Cork, we have Ballincollig Regional Park, but if there's a loop, you can leave it in the ditch somewhere, hide it behind a bush, or you plan your route and you know where you strategically will leave water if you can't carry it yourself. And I know every runner in Ireland has hidden a bottle somewhere at some point, and some people even forget where they have them. So yeah, hydration is very important, but I have to say there are water stations on a marathon, and they are every 5 kilometers. And like I said, you don't need to gulp and feel like it's the last pint at last call. You need to sip. You need to train yourself to recognize when you're thirsty and drink to thirst. And then there's the whole argument about electrolytes, and they are really overhyped at the moment. And like, people are taking electrolytes every day, and you don't need to take them every day. And, you know, I suppose electrolyte companies will talk about, you know, taking on electrolytes, and it'll replace your vitamins, and take an electrolyte sachet every day. But you don't need to do it, because it's not like it's holy water. It's not going to cure anything, because most electrolyte drinks are basically salt. And Sean Seck, in her episode on electrolytes and hydration, like she was saying, if you have a subscription, cancel it now, because if you're living in Ireland and you're eating normal food, you're getting plenty of salt already. It's in bread, it's in soup, it's in ready meals, it's in takeaways. If you have a packet of crisps, the old Tato's, they're in there, and sometimes you'll crave it after a run. But electrolytes do help. And, you know, in George's episode, because Precision Fuel started off as an electrolyte company, as a hydration company before they started using gels, they have different grades of hydration tablets. And he recommended to me, and now I got a sweat test done. And this is where having electrolytes and, you know, looking at yourself and looking at your training, this is where it can help, because on the 17th of April at the Edge Sports, they're doing a sweat test. Now, I did a sweat test and I found out that I was a low salty sweater. So I didn't have as much need as some people would. Now, it doesn't mean if you've got white scum on your face as you finish a race that you really need to replacing salt during your race. But you do need to know how much salt you're losing to see how much you should be replacing. Now, if it's unusually warm, if you're running longer than 90 minutes, which you would be in a marathon, you'll be sweating a lot. And if you're racing, you'll be sweating a lot. And if it's a hot summer race or a race abroad, you will need to make sure you get some electrolytes on board. And what Precision Fuel recommended was they have a 1500 tablet, to take that an hour before the race. And what was recommended to me was taking 2 salt capsules, easy for me to say, during the race. So at a water station, I had it ready and I took some capsules, and I did that probably after the first hour and the second hour. They say, and a lot of people think, that if you get cramp, you must need electrolytes. But most of the time, cramp isn't caused by low electrolytes. It's usually by either running too fast, not training properly, or your legs are just being really tired at mile 22, which is, to be fair, a very normal emotional response from your hamstrings. And I have to say that I did suffer from that myself, not cramp, but just I had been pushing myself to do a sub 4, and probably around mile 22, I did feel like my hamstrings got stiff. And, it wasn't one of these cramp situations. It was definitely just being tired. So it is something to look into. But again, as I said, listen to episode 31. And I know there are some electrolytes in Ultra Nutrition as well. So you are getting a lot of salt in. So it is important to know really how much salt you're losing before you start panicking and thinking, I must take electrolytes every day. And also there's a piece of advice, is that drinking too much water prior to a race can also wash away some of those important nutrients that you're taking on board. So again, like I said, it is a very confusing topic, but it can really be helped by you practicing taking on your water during your long runs, seeing how much salt you need to take on during a long run, and practicing particularly on your Saturday or Sunday long runs leading up to a marathon. I know that's what I did, and I was going into the marathons, both Cork and Dublin last year, fairly confident about what I was doing. I was taking 30 grams of gel, 2 of them every hour with Precision Fuel. So I started off by taking 2 gels, and then my next batch of gels were the Ultra Nutrition, which was I had it in a 250 ml flask. I had Ultra Nutrition. So that was, on that particular day, that was the equivalent to 1 gel. And then I took a caffeine gel. And then I repeated that, just exactly the same thing, for the second half of the race. So for me, I took on 8 gels in total. I didn't feel like the last 2, and I didn't feel like them in Cork either. And I think in Cork, I skipped the last one, and I really felt it for the last 45 minutes. In Dublin, I felt similarly, and I made sure I took the last one, and it definitely made a difference. I definitely felt better having taken the gel when I didn't want to take it in Cork, if you know what I mean. So that gets me into caffeine. And in any of the programs that I've talked about, I bring it up because it's had a huge benefit for me taking a caffeine gel. Now, I'm going to say again that I gave up caffeinated tea and coffee, and some people take a break from caffeinated drinks about 2 weeks before a long run or a race, more like a marathon. Again, so that they can feel the effect, because if you're drinking lots of coffee all the time, you won't get the bang for your buck that I would get from a caffeine gel or a caffeine drink or whatever. But it can absolutely help your performance. It's one of the most researched things in sport. And here is what it does. It doesn't give you energy. It makes running feel easier, which is exactly what you want when you're somewhere around mile 30 of the Dublin Marathon, Cork Marathon, Limerick Marathon. And at that point, you might be seriously questioning your life choices. Caffeine gel will take that panic away. And again, never try it for the first time, or never try any of these things for the first time on a race day, because you'll find yourself getting really ill. Your stomach doesn't feel like it. And if it doesn't feel like it, you'll find out very quickly. And that's why it's really important to try it on your race day. And if you want to use caffeine, you can take some before the race, take one about an hour in, as I said, and take the other one probably about 2 to 2.5 hours in. So then you're getting the benefit for the latter half of the race. If you take too much caffeine, you can get jittery, you can get anxious, can set your heart racing. You can almost question reality, but it can also affect your tummy, and you could end up looking for the next toilet sign. So it's always important to train with your fuel. So if you're running a long run where it's going to be like 2 hours, which is probably half, if you're a 4-hour marathon runner, it's going to be like half your marathon. Get your first half of the race gelling strategy in place during that whole thing, and then you repeat it for the second half of the race. If it caffeine, you have to remember it takes 45 minutes for a caffeine gel to kick in, so you must take it, I would say, at least an hour before the end, and then maybe an hour into the race as well. So therefore, you're getting the benefits at times when you may be more tired than you would normally. So if you remember nothing else from this episode, remember this. Hydration is important. Drink to thirst, small sips. Don't overthink it, because too many people will overthink the hydration side of things. Also, in your pre-fueling, as in the day before, you will hydrate yourself a little bit more on the day before, and probably the 2 days before as well. Again, electrolytes, you definitely don't need them every day. You're getting a lot of salt during your everyday diet, but you do want to think about them if you're running for over 90 minutes, if you're sweating a lot. They can be great for after a race as well, just to replenish, but don't take them every day because you don't need them. And I think there's lots of not medical advice out there yet, but there was a lot of panic in the medical circles about too much salt in our diet in the past. And if we are taking on too many electrolytes, that can't be good for us either. Caffeine, I'll say again, when they talk about super shoes giving you 3 to 4%, I genuinely believe that caffeine gels give you more than that. And they are super important for me, but make sure you're testing them in training. Most importantly, keep things simple. Keep it simple. You don't need complicated routines, but get those routines in place. You don't need expensive supplements. Just get your simple routine in place. You don't need to carry half a pharmacy in your running vest. You just need a plan that works for you and a bit of patience with the training. You might need a decent rain jacket in Ireland after a run, but you really don't need to overcomplicate it. And maybe even after listening to this episode, you might still have your head full of complicated, what was he talking about? I say again, the experts are in episode 29, 30 and 31. But for me, it was all about taking on 2 gels at 30-gram gels. Precision is very good because it has right on the front of the packet how much carbohydrate you're taking on. 30 grams of carbohydrate, 2 of those gels every hour. Some people need a bit more, and this is where I say you need to gauge it yourself. When you're going out on those long runs, if you're taking 2 gels an hour and you're still feeling like you need some more, then you need to up your intake. And that's really is kind of important. And you can fit in 3 an hour. But the reality of it is also for us middle of the pack runners is that you do end up, if you're out there for 4 hours, that means taking on 8 gels, and it's a lot. And that's why it's so important to train yourself. So it is simply preloading with an electrolyte on the morning of a race. When you get up, start off with 500 mils with a precision hydration tablet. Sip it as you're getting your number on your vest and you're preparing yourself. Make sure you've got all your gels in place. So if you're running 4 hours like me, I had 2 normal gels, 1 caffeine gel. I had a carbohydrate drinks mix, 2 gels, 1 caffeine gel, and then finishing off with the Speed Dust, the drinks mix as well. That worked for me. It may not work for you, but that's where you really need to think about how you can come up with your race day strategy. There are 2 months to the Cork City Marathon, so there's plenty of time. And don't think I'm only going out for an hour and a half. I don't need it. Go out for an hour and a half and practice your gel strategy. You may have run a half marathon where you haven't needed 3 gels. Run a half marathon, and if it's an hour and a half or if it's 2 hours you're doing it, take 4 gels. You might need it, but you're training yourself for the big marathon day. And, I remember when we were in training block for the Cork City Marathon, we were doing it with the Runner's Diary podcast, and one of the people saying that's going to be really expensive, all those gels that we're going to be taking. But, once you come out of the marathon block and once you come out of the training, you don't really need to take them on all your training runs. But while you're in the training for the marathon, training for fueling is just as important. Now, I did mention earlier on, there is a sweat test on the 17th of April at the Edge Sport if you're interested in finding out about how you sweat and whether you're a salty sweater. And that result will stay with you for life. So you can contact the Edge Sport direct. I know the spaces are filling up quickly. So even as this goes out, they may have filled up, but contact them direct and see what they're doing. They may also have another one coming in the future. So think about that too. The main thing is not to get overly stressed about the whole thing. With hydration, with taking on water, every 5 kilometers in a half marathon or a marathon, there's going to be a water station. Take on the water, drink thirst. When it comes to taking on a bit of salt, it won't hurt you to take on a couple of salt tabs. If you are a heavy salty sweater, then you might need to take on more. There's salt chews. Again, somewhere like the Edge Sport or John Buckley Sports will give you advice on that. Take some of them on board. You can't really take on too much, but you don't need to be drinking electrolytes every day. And I say that again and again and again. And then finally, like a super shoe, I think caffeine gels really, really work. So I would think about that. I would train, if you can, using them, and you will feel the benefit during your race. But make sure you do it properly and you train with them and you get your race strategy in place. So that's really 30 minutes of humble advice from a middle of the pack runner that used gels, that use Alter, that use caffeine gels, and really felt the benefit of it. I'm doing Dublin Marathon this year, so I will be replicating that. And I've already started to introduce gels into my routine. I'm doing the Cork Marathon as half marathon, so I will be taking gels for that just to get myself back into that routine of taking gels and learning how to take them while keeping my pace up. As my wife always points out, I do slow down when I'm taking my gels. But again, as Connor says from Alter Nutrition, you sip, sip, sip. You don't have to gulp it all down at once. So that has been episode 35 of the Middle of the Pack podcast. My name is Padraig. If you listen to it regularly, you know that we always have a guest on, but not this week. I just wanted to talk about my fueling journey, and I have to say it has been sometimes difficult, but I feel like I've cracked it now. If you want to have If you have any questions, you can email me at motpire, middle of the pack, Ireland. So motpire@gmail.com if you've got any questions about fueling, any questions about hydration, any question about electrolytes, and I'll try and find the answer for you. That's motpire@gmail.com. So for this week, thanks for listening and keep on running.